In late 2017, the New York Times newspaper published a shocking story, raising more than just a few eyebrows. The daily news cycle was abuzz with the same burning question. What is America's government not telling its citizens about unidentified flying objects in its airspace? I myself first saw the story on my local gym's television, CNN airing alongside the story the leaked military footage capturing encounters between American soldiers and UFOs, reclassified as UAPs. The US government has acknowledged the presence of objects in the sky that are intelligently controlled, admits their origin is unknown, and cannot reproduce their capabilities with any known technology. And now, one of the government's own is purporting a secret program exists within the Department of Defense for the purpose of reverse engineering recovered non-human craft, as well as obtaining non-human biological material. Is whistleblower DavidGrusch telling the truth? As often is the case with this topic, we are only left with more questions. People have been seeing unexplainable things in the sky since recorded history, perhaps beyond. These encounters leave witnesses in awe, fear, confusion, and sometimes in a near state of enlightenment of an almost religious nature. But some encounters leave more than just a lasting memory. These incidents supposedly not only leave lasting marks on the witness's psyche, but on their physical health as well. Like the Cash-Landrum UFO Incident, allegedly a true horror in history. It was a decidedly mild late December evening in the year 1980, as Betty Cash, Vickie Landrum, and Vickie's grandson Colby were on their way home from eating out at a local truck stop restaurant in New Caney, Texas, 30 miles northeast of Houston. It was around 9 in the evening as the three drove along a small 2-lane wooded road back home to Dayton. Sitting in the back seat, 7-year-old Colby points out a distant light in the sky. Being only 35 miles from the Houston Intercontinental Airport, the group didn't pay much attention to the small light, believing it to be just another plane, surely full of tired passengers attempting to catch a wink or two of sleep before arriving at their destination. Cash, Landrum, and Colby continued on their journey home when only minutes later the light reappeared. This time, much closer, revealing itself just above the treetops down the road from the surprised travelers. The group described the light coming from a red, glowing diamond-shaped craft, which spewed what appeared to be flames from its base as it continued to approach their vehicle. Betty was urged by Vickie to stop the car, as all three were already feeling the heat building inside, emanating from the approaching craft. Betty hit the brakes and brought her Oldsmobile Cutlass to a hard stop. Initially, she was so anxious about the encounter that she considered turning the car around, but the narrow road and muddy conditions from earlier rains meant the risk of getting stuck, putting their success of escape into question. So she decided to stay put. Though according to Cash, their vehicle went completely dead when they stopped in front of the object, leaving them helpless. The two women stared in silence, mesmerized. Colby, continuing to feel the intense heat rising in the car as the strange craft drew closer, became terrified and crawled onto the floorboard of the car to hide. Landrum, a devout Christian, attempted to calm her grandson, believing the craft to be a religious sign, assuring the frightened boy no harm would come to them. A regrettably poor assumption. Both women decided to leave the car, stepping out into the night to get a closer look at the craft. The heat outside of the vehicle was much more intense, as the object hovered just over the road in front of them, flames continuing to sporadically spread from its underbelly in a canonical form. Colby's terror only grew, so Vickie quickly got back in the car to console him. Betty Cash remained outside and got even closer to the craft, awestruck. She was able to make out that the object was a dull metallic gray, with blue lights circling the center of the diamond. It wasn't long before the heat grew too intense, and a strange, shrill sound coming from the craft, almost deafening, became too much to bear. Betty returned to the vehicle, burning her hand on the car door, requiring the use of her jacket to safely grasp the handle. Inside the car, the vinyl dash became so soft from the heat that Vickie's hand reportedly left an embedded imprint upon touching it. It was around this moment that the fiery diamond ascended back above the treetops and began to depart as a large formation of military helicopters arrived, seemingly as an escort for the craft. The trio said they were able to count a fleet of up to 23 helicopters they described as resembling U.S. Chinooks, typically used for troop movement and hauling heavy cargo. As the strange object moved away from the road, the helicopters followed, and the Cutlass came back to life, allowing the three to continue on their way home, as they watched the diamond become a distant light once again. They believed their ordeal to be over. They were wrong. Within 30 minutes following the encounter, Betty Cash claimed to begin feeling ill. She stated during the 1981 Bergstrom Air Force Base interview that she felt as though she'd spent too much time out in the sun, her whole body experiencing a burning sensation. VickieColby would echo these claims, experiencing the same burning sensations, including pain in their eyes. Cash would go on to say that the following morning, she couldn't get out of bed, feeling extremely dehydrated, blisters forming on her skin. She was admitted to the emergency room on January 2, 1981, where a dermatologist noted swelling of her scalp and face, Cash claiming that her family wasn't able to recognize her when visiting due to the swelling. She would remain hospitalized for 12 days. Landrum and Colby also sought medical treatment, Landrum claiming her 7-year-old grandson became almost infantile, needing to be carried due to weakness along with experiencing debilitating diarrhea, a symptom all three would share, along with headaches, nausea, vomiting, and blistered skin. More extreme symptoms would be reported, such as hair loss suffered by all three, and Landrum claiming the loss of her fingernails, which she reportedly kept for lab sequencing and other tests. After her initial release from the hospital in January, Betty Cash hadn't found much relief and would be admitted to the hospital for another 2 weeks. All three were initially treated for burns, but due to their symptoms, their treatment shifted for acute radiation exposure. Vicki Landrum claimed in her 1981 Bergstrom Air Force Base interview that she was even denied treatment on occasion, due to suspected radioactive contamination, though we could find no mention of any actual readings being administered on the witnesses with detection tools such as dosimeters that would confirm radiation exposure. But given their graphic symptoms, it is clear that Betty, Vicki, and Colby were all exposed to something hazardous on that fateful December night in the Texas countryside, and they wanted answers. Vicki Landrum took it upon herself to begin making calls to authorities shortly after the incident, desperate for answers. Landrum was able to get in contact with government officials, namely U.S. Senators Lloyd Bentsen and John Tower. Senator Tower suggested that the witnesses file a claim with Bergstrom Air Force Base, where all three would be interviewed in August 1981. Following their detailed description of the encounter and their injuries, some still evident during the interview, they were advised to hire an attorney and seek financial compensation from the U.S. government. Legal proceedings would reach numerous courtrooms over several years. Members of the Army, Navy, United States Air Force, and even NASA all gave testimony over the claims that the U.S. government was involved in regards to the Chinook helicopters that appeared with the object. And the three witnesses weren't the only ones to see the helicopters. In 1982, a Lieutenant Colonel George Sarin from the Department of Army Inspector General headed up the only formal government investigation into the encounter, with the aim of confirming the presence of military aircraft at the time of the incident. During the investigation, 2 more witnesses were located and questioned. A local police officer who was out driving at night around the time of the encounter. The officer, a Mr. Lamar Walker, stated that he and his wife, Marie, counted at least 12 helicopters flying in the area of the encounter, with what the officer described as large searchlights scanning the ground. Sarin found that the officer, along with Cash and Landrum, were all credible and did not in any way attempt to exaggerate or embellish their stories. As to additional physical evidence tied to the encounter, special attention was paid particularly to Betty Cash's Oldsmobile Cutlass and the area of the encounter itself. A Geiger counter was used to measure radiation on both the car and the road where the witnesses encountered the craft. No abnormal readings were found on either the car or the road, although UFO researchers have pointed out that ionizing radiation harmful to humans would not necessarily induce measurable radioactivity in inanimate objects or the environment. And while many supporters of Cash and Landrum's story agree that the witnesses were likely exposed to harmful radiation, skeptics propose that the rapid onset of symptoms the witnesses suffered could only be possible if receiving a fatal dose of radiation that would have seen them dead within days. But Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum would go on to live for many years after their initial illness, Colby Landrum the only surviving witness today. These same skeptics then suggest that the witnesses were likely exposed to a contaminant of a more chemical nature, perhaps a toxic aerosol produced by the craft. A more compelling component of the case occurred in April 1981, when Vickie Landrum took her grandson to an air show in Dayton. There, a CH-47 helicopter was coming in to land. Colby became terrified by the sight of it. His grandmother, Vickie, decided to take him to meet the pilot in order to quell his fears. Once inside the helicopter, the pilot mentioned he'd been in the area before, around Huffman, a 15-minute drive east of Dayton, where he was tasked with responding to a reported UFO. Elated, Vickie responded with the story of how she encountered the UFO and suffered injuries from its presence. The pilot then reportedly grew agitated and rushed Vickie and her grandson from the aircraft, refusing to speak with them further. By 1986, legal proceedings in the Cash-Landrum incident had all but dried up. The courts were never able to receive any concrete evidence from the plaintiffs regarding the involvement of military aircraft with the encounter, along with the possession of the diamond craft itself. The witnesses sought $20 million in damages from the government, but due to the lack of evidence, the case was dismissed. The truth of what happened on that December night in 1980 would never be revealed before the passing of Vickie Landrum and Betty Cash. Cash was diagnosed with breast cancer and treated in 1983. She died at the age of 69 on December 29, 1998, exactly 18 years to the day of her encounter with the UFO. Vickie Landrum passed away in 2007, aged 83. The only surviving member, Colby, now in his 40s, still searches for answers as to what he, his grandmother, and Betty saw on the road that night that changed their lives forever. Was the diamond craft exotic technology controlled by a non-human intelligence? Or was it of a more terrestrial nature? A government reverse engineering test gone wrong when 3 innocent bystanders met it face to face. Only questions remain as the Cash-Landrum UFO incident continues on as a genuine enigma within the UFO community. No one able to conclusively prove or debunk the events described by the witnesses because of the deadlock of progress reached in the courtrooms. Will we ever come face to face one day with non-human or experimental technology like Betty Cash, Vickie, and Colby Landrum reportedly encountered in 1980? And if so, is it even safe? If the 3 witnesses actually did see a UFO at such close proximity, incurring a heavy toll on their health as a result, then it demonstrates the potential dangers of simply being in the vicinity of such craft, making the outcome of first contact that much more uncertain as to the risks it would pose. Risks the witnesses of the Cash-Landrum UFO incident came to know all too well, making it a true horror in history. Allegedly. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, especially if you are new to the channel. Thanks for watching Horrors in History.